Story number 1. Midnight's Vanishing Passenger, a chilling drive through Willowbrook. The summer of 2001 will forever remain etched in my mind. It was a time of unexpected horror and mysteries I wish I could forget. I was 25 at the time, driving my cab through the suburbs of Willowbrook in the United States. It was a humid evening in August, the sort where even the droning of cicadas seemed oppressive. The radio played some light rock tunes as I awaited a potential customer in the parking lot of the dilapidated Willows Motel. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on the ground. A soft knock on the passenger window broke my reverie. I turned to see a young girl, probably no older than 20, with pale skin and jet black hair that flowed over her thin white dress. She looked petrified, her eyes darting around. "I need to get to the old church on Elm Street." "Please, hurry," she whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. As we drove, I tried to make conversation, hoping to calm her nerves. "You staying at Willows?" She nodded slowly. "For a few nights. I had some research to conduct." The mention of research caught my attention. "Are you a student?" I asked. "Yes, a history major," she replied. Her name was Emma. She and her friends, including her boyfriend David, a budding journalist, and Sarah, a keen photographer, had traveled to Willowbrook to explore the local lore surrounding the old church. Rumors of devil worship, unexplained deaths, and eerie apparitions had piqued their interest. "The church is believed to be built on an old burial ground, you know?" "My friends and I wanted to debunk the myth," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. But her tone changed when she mentioned the previous night. David had set up some recording equipment inside the church, hoping to capture paranormal phenomena. They had indeed experienced eerie occurrences, whispers in the dark, fleeting shadows, and a cold presence that seemed to be watching them. "I woke up this morning, and David was gone." There was a note on the bedside table, written in what looked like blood. Emma's voice broke as she pulled out a folded paper. It read, "Leave or suffer." I felt a chill run down my spine. What had these kids gotten themselves into? When we finally reached the old church, the Gothic spires cast long, sinister shadows. "I'll wait here," I assured her. She hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod and ran towards the church. It felt like hours passed. A dense fog had enveloped the surroundings, and the church's outline had become barely discernible. Suddenly, my radio emitted a high-pitched noise, making me jump. Before I could react, a chilling voice whispered, "Leave now." Panicking, I turned to check on Emma. But she was nowhere in sight. Frantically searching the back seat, my eyes landed on a piece of folded paper similar to the one Emma had shown me. Trembling, I opened it. "You should have listened." With my heart pounding, I slammed on the accelerator, desperate to leave that accursed place. When I finally stopped, I was miles away from the church. I reported the incident to the local police. The subsequent investigation was a whirlwind of terrifying revelations. The church, as Emma had mentioned, was built over an old burial ground, but what she didn't know was that it was also the site of multiple exorcism deaths in the 18th century. Devil worship and occult rituals had tainted the very ground. David's body was discovered inside the church, surrounded by ritualistic symbols. Sarah's camera, found discarded nearby, contained photos of ghostly figures and sinister apparitions. Emma was never found. Even today, the horrifying events of that night haunt me. I've since given up cab driving, but the memories persist, of that ill-fated journey, the chilling note, and a midnight passenger who vanished into the foggy abyss of Willowbrook's sinister past. Story number 2. The Bridge to Nowhere, a night I'll never forget. It was the fall of 2002, and the suburbs of Oak Ridge were painted in hues of red and gold. As a cab driver, I'd seen my fair share of unusual rides, but nothing prepared me for what would become the most haunting night of my life. It all began on a particularly cold October evening when I picked up a young woman named Clara, dressed in an elegant black dress. Her destination? Raven's Bridge. The locals often whispered about it, dubbing it the bridge to nowhere due to the ominous legends surrounding it. Why would you want to go there at this hour? I hesitated. Clara looked at me with hauntingly beautiful eyes. It's an anniversary. I need to be there. Feeling the weight of her emotion, I didn't pry further and headed towards the infamous bridge. As we approached, I couldn't help but recall the stories I'd heard of ghostly apparitions, devil worship, and the gruesome deaths of those who dared to cross it at night. As we began our journey over the bridge, Clara began to tell me about her late fiancé, Marcus, a paranormal investigator. A year ago, they had come to the bridge along with two other friends, Mia, an anthropologist, and Ben, a sound technician, hoping to debunk the ghostly legends. But what they encountered was far beyond their wildest fears. Marcus had been consumed by the bridge's darkness, becoming another lost soul, forever trapped. I need to find him, Clara whispered. As we reached the midpoint of the bridge, my car's engine suddenly sputtered and died. Panic rose within me. The dim glow of the headlights illuminated ghostly figures drifting towards us. Among them, I recognized the ghastly form of Marcus, a pale shadow of his former self, his eyes void of any humanity. We shouldn't have come here, I muttered, paralyzed with fear. Clara, in her desperation, stepped out, calling to Marcus. He hesitated, torn between the darkness that held him and the love that beckoned him. Suddenly, the air grew cold, and a deep, disembodied voice boomed, "Leave this place, or face the wrath of the bridge." Not wanting to test the threat, I desperately tried to restart the car. Just when I was about to give up, the engine roared to life, and I wasted no time speeding away, leaving behind the horrors of the bridge. Upon reaching the safety of the city, Clara thanked me, her face a mask of grief. "I had to try," she whispered before disappearing into the night. Curiosity got the best of me, and the next day, I began my own investigation. Digging into the bridge's history, I discovered a chilling tale. The bridge was once the site of numerous exorcism rituals gone wrong, leading to multiple deaths. Devil worshippers had claimed it as their unholy ground, performing rituals that forever tainted its foundations. The stories of ghostly apparitions weren't just rumors. They were the lost souls, forever bound to the bridge. Marcus, lured by the tales, had unknowingly become a part of its tormented history. That ride forever changed my perspective on the tales we often dismiss as mere folklore. Now, whenever I hear whispers of haunted places or cursed grounds, I remember that terrifying night in 2002 and pray never to encounter such horrors again. Story number 3. Gone in the Rearview, the Phantom Passenger of Waverly Hills. The year was 2003. I was a fresh-faced 28-year-old, driving my cab through the tranquil suburbs of Waverly Hills. The evening had been relatively quiet, but as the darkness deepened, I found myself growing more uneasy. It began subtly. In the dim glow of my cab's interior light, I spotted a figure in my rearview mirror, seated in the back. I was startled. I hadn't picked up a passenger. Glancing back, I found the seat empty. Thinking it was just my imagination, I continued driving. However, every time I looked into the mirror, the figure returned. It was a young man, with hollowed eyes and an expression of deep anguish. The more I saw him, the more defined he became, tattered clothes, chains around his wrists, and a dark aura. Terrifyingly, with each glance, he seemed to move closer. Frantically, I pulled over, jumping out of the cab, and inspected the back seat. It was empty. Heart pounding, I thought about abandoning the cab altogether, but I needed my livelihood. Taking a deep breath, I continued on my route, avoiding the rearview mirror. But curiosity got the better of me. Peeking once more, I found the figure even closer, his cold eyes meeting mine, mouthing a silent plea. In blind panic, I accelerated, praying to reach the safety of a populated area. As I sped through the deserted streets, I was flagged down by a young woman named Lisa, a local journalist. Not wanting to be alone, I quickly let her in. Sensing my distress, she inquired, and I relayed my haunting experience. Her face turned pale. "I've been researching Waverly Hill's dark past. What you described sounds eerily similar to a man named Ethan," she whispered. Lisa began to recount a tragic tale. In the 1960s, Waverly Hills was home to a nefarious cult led by a sinister figure named Malachi. Ethan, a local, had discovered their practices and tried to expose them but was captured, chained, and subjected to failed exorcisms and dark rituals. His tortured soul, it was said, roamed the streets, seeking salvation. Our conversation was interrupted by a sharp chill in the air and a looming presence in the back seat. The cab's lights flickered, the radio emitted a haunting melody, and in the rearview mirror, Ethan's ghostly figure was clearer than ever, reaching out. Lisa, with a determined look, began to chant a prayer, clutching a silver cross from her necklace. The atmosphere grew dense, the cab shook violently, but she didn't waver. After what felt like hours, the cab went still, the weight in the air lifted, and Ethan's figure faded away. Grateful, I dropped Lisa off at her destination. She left me with a warning: Waverly Hills holds many secrets. Be wary of where you tread. The traumatic events of that night are forever etched in my memory. Now, every time I find myself in Waverly Hills, I make sure to avoid the routes Ethan's spirit was said to haunt, never wanting to relive the terror of the phantom passenger in my rear view. Story number 4. The Whispering Forest, the town time forgot. That was the year my life changed forever. I was 26, driving my cab in the outskirts of Harrowsville, a suburb known for its sprawling woods and rich folklore. My evening was winding down when a last-minute fare popped up on my screen, a request to traverse through Harrowsville woods to a neighboring town. It was a route I'd taken 100 times before. However, this journey was different. As I drove deeper into the forest, a soft whisper began to fill the air. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but it grew louder and more distinct. It wasn't just a single voice but many, murmuring incoherently. The voices seemed to beckon me, guiding me off the main road and deeper into the woods. I don't know how long I drove, but when I finally came to my senses, I was on a dilapidated road leading to a forgotten town. Its sign read "Welcome to Silent Hollow." The houses looked abandoned, the streets eerily quiet, but the whispers, they were louder than ever. Hesitantly, I stepped out of my cab and was soon approached by a young woman named Sarah, an archaeologist. She explained that she had come to Silent Hollow in search of answers about her family lineage. Her research led her to believe that the town was once a hub for devil worship and paranormal activities. She introduced me to her colleague, Alex, a historian. He had uncovered records detailing the town's dark history. In the late 1800s, the townspeople of Silent Hollow, led by a malevolent priest named Father Blackwood, performed a series of failed exorcisms, which resulted in numerous unexplained deaths. The town, ashamed and fearful, decided to abandon Silent Hollow, leaving behind the tormented souls. Together, we roamed the town, hoping to find a way out. The whispers grew more aggressive, guiding us to the old church at the heart of Silent Hollow. Inside, we found symbols of devil worship and remnants of old rituals. The whispers turned to screams, echoing the pain and torment of the souls trapped there. Sarah, having brought along some protective amulets, suggested we perform a ritual to release the spirits. As we began, Father Blackwood's apparition appeared, attempting to thwart our efforts. The church's atmosphere became oppressive, the temperature dropping drastically. In desperation, Alex began reciting an old exorcism chant he'd come across in his research. The battle of wills between us and Father Blackwood was intense. With every chant, the church shook, the screams intensified, but we didn't waver. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, and a gust of wind blew past us. As our vision cleared, Father Blackwood was gone, and the church was silent. The spirits of Silent Hollow had finally found their peace. Emerging from the church, we found that the once decrepit town looked different. The sun shone brightly, and the path leading out of Silent Hollow was clear. Sarah, Alex, and I quickly made our way out, vowing never to return. To this day, when I recount that night to others, it feels like a dream. But the memories of the whispers, the cold touch of unseen spirits, and the haunting eyes of Father Blackwood remind me of the terrifying reality of Silent Hollow. And while I've had many fares since then, none have come close to the horror I experienced that fateful night in 2004. Story number 5. The Looping Lane, the never-ending nightmare. In 2005, when I was 29, I experienced a cab ride that defies logic and haunts my memories. I was cruising the dimly lit streets of Ashfield, a quaint suburb, when a frantic young woman flagged me down. She introduced herself as Emily, a psychology student. "Please, just drive," she urged, her voice trembling. As I took her through the labyrinthine alleys of Ashfield, following her disjointed instructions, something eerie became apparent. Every turn, every corner we took, led us back to the same graffiti-covered wall, depicting an ominous hooded figure holding a lantern. The first few times, I dismissed it as a bizarre coincidence. But as the loop continued, the atmosphere shifted. The shadows grew longer, the silence deepened, and the once familiar streets of Ashfield transformed into a menacing maze. Emily's state worsened with every loop. She whispered about a paper she'd been writing, exploring urban legends. One such tale was of a cursed alley in Ashfield known as the Looping Lane. Legend said it trapped souls, making them relive their worst fears until dawn. A young man named Jake, a paranormal investigator, had been studying this phenomenon. Emily had joined him on his last investigation, drawn by her academic curiosity. But something went wrong, and they got separated. Desperate, we tried different paths, alleyways, and shortcuts, but the hooded figure on the wall seemed omnipresent, its painted eyes watching, waiting. Suddenly, Jake emerged from the shadows, holding an old compass. "This is our way out," he said. But the compass didn't point north. Instead, it directed us towards the heart of the alley, where a dilapidated chapel stood. Inside the chapel, we found disturbing evidence. Candles arranged in pentagrams, symbols of devil worship, and records of exorcisms gone awry. Jake theorized that the Looping Lane was a purgatory for souls caught between realms, a result of a botched ritual. To break the loop, we had to correct the ritual. Using Jake's research and Emily's knowledge of the occult, we set up a protective circle. As we chanted, the chapel rumbled, shadows danced menacingly, and ghostly apparitions of those trapped in the loop screamed in anguish. As the final verse left our lips, a blinding flash engulfed us. When our vision cleared, we stood outside the chapel, the first rays of dawn breaking the horizon. Jake's compass finally pointed north. Relieved, we parted ways. I dropped Emily home, ensuring she was safe. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw the hooded figure, its painted eyes staring back at me, before it faded away. The Looping Lane remains one of Ashfield's darkest mysteries. And while its streets have seen many cab rides since that fateful night, none venture near that cursed alley after dark. I still drive through Ashfield, but every time I pass that graffiti-covered wall, a shiver runs down my spine, reminding me of the night I almost got lost forever. Story number 6. The Disappearing Destination, the mansion that mocked me. It was 2006, the year that broke the boundaries of my beliefs. At 27, I'd been a cab driver in the peaceful suburb of Larkspur for a few years. The town was like any other, with its share of tales, but none as eerie as the one I lived one fateful night. It was a rainy evening when a man, looking to be in his late 20s, hailed my cab. Dressed in a tailored suit, he introduced himself as Robert, an architect. He handed me an old, tattered piece of paper with an address scribbled on it, directing me to a mansion deep within Larkspur's outskirts. As we drove, he told me about the mansion, known as the Evermist Manor. It was a project handed to him by a heritage society to renovate. The mansion was infamous for tales of ghostly apparitions, devil worship, and exorcism deaths. But Robert, being a man of science, paid no heed to such tales. The drive was longer than expected, but in the distance, the silhouette of a grand mansion became visible through the mist. But as I drove closer, an unsettling phenomenon began. Each time the mansion seemed within reach, it would suddenly vanish, only to reappear further away. Confused and anxious, I looked to Robert, whose pale face mirrored my trepidation. It was as if the mansion was playing a cruel game, leading us deeper into unknown territory. Hours seemed to pass, and with each attempt to approach the mansion, the surroundings grew increasingly sinister. Trees looked like twisted figures, and shadows danced menacingly. In one of my desperate attempts to reach the elusive mansion, a young woman named Clara flagged us down. She was a local journalist who'd been investigating the stories of Evermist Manor. Clara shared her findings. The mansion was once owned by a dark cult, which practiced heinous rituals. The leader, a malevolent figure named Lord Harrow, had dabbled in forbidden arts, causing the mansion to be caught between dimensions. The only way to access the mansion and escape this loop was to break the curse. Clara had with her ancient artifacts and texts that hinted at a ritual. The three of us, driven by desperation, decided to perform it. At a clearing, with the Evermist Manor tantalizingly in view, we set up a circle. Reciting chants and placing the artifacts accordingly, the atmosphere became electric. Winds howled, the earth trembled, and ghostly screams filled the air. Suddenly, an apparition of Lord Harrow manifested, attempting to thwart our ritual. But with combined determination, Robert, Clara, and I held our ground. With one final, deafening roar, a blinding light flashed. When our vision cleared, we stood at the entrance of Evermist Manor, its grand doors open as if inviting us in. We didn't dare enter, the night's events were more than enough. I dropped Robert and Clara off in Larkspur, their faces a testament to the horrors we'd witnessed. The tales of Evermist Manor grew after that night, fortified by our chilling experience. My cab has seen many passengers since then, but I never drive towards the outskirts after dark. Because every time I recall that haunting mansion that played hide and seek with reality, chills run down my spine, a grim reminder of the night in 2006 when reality became the stuff of nightmares. Story number 7. Backseat Premonitions, the Oracle of Dunbridge Drive. 2007 was the year I, Mark, at 28, learned to believe in the impossible. Being a cab driver in the serene suburbs of Dunbridge, I thought I had seen it all. But a particular passenger that year proved me wrong. On a night veiled in fog, an elderly woman named Agatha stepped into my cab. Dressed in vintage clothing, her milky eyes seemed to harbor age-old secrets. As I began to drive, she declared, "I can see the impending doom, young man. Today, you must listen to me if you wish to survive." Slightly unnerved but assuming it was just a quirk, I humored her. But soon, her predictions began to unfold. "Turn left here, and not right," she'd caution, and moments later, a huge tree would fall on the right side of the road we'd narrowly avoided. During the ride, I picked up Lucy, a 24-year-old nurse. She and Agatha quickly bonded, and Lucy began documenting the predictions as they happened. As we drove, the dangers grew closer and more personal. A shadowy figure seemed to be following us, manifesting wherever we went. This unknown entity was causing the very dangers Agatha foresaw. The climax came when Agatha, panic evident in her voice, urged me to stop the car. "Drive to the old chapel on Hollow Street," she directed. Trusting her implicitly now, I sped to the location. The chapel, long abandoned, was said to be a hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts due to its history of exorcism deaths and devil worship. Agatha claimed it was the only place we'd be safe. As we entered, we met David, a 27-year-old paranormal investigator who had been researching the chapel's dark past. Together, the four of us began to connect the dots. Agatha was once a member of the cult that had practiced in the chapel. In her youth, she'd fled the group and its sinister leader, who vowed revenge upon her. Over the years, Agatha's psychic abilities had developed, her bond with the supernatural realm strengthened due to her past. She realized that the shadowy entity was the vengeful spirit of the cult leader, brought back through some dark ritual. With David's knowledge and Agatha's psychic abilities, we devised a plan to send the spirit back. Using ancient texts and relics David had with him, we began a ritual to counteract the entity's power. The process was harrowing. The entity tried to break our defenses, manifesting as terrifying apparitions and using its influence to manipulate our fears. But united in purpose, we persisted. In the end, with a blinding flash and a deafening scream, the entity was banished. The chapel, once a place of dread, became our sanctuary that night. As dawn broke, Agatha, Lucy, David, and I parted ways, forever bound by the terrors of that fateful night. Dunbridge, with its white picket fences and friendly faces, had revealed a shadowy underbelly I could never have imagined. To this day, whenever I pass the old chapel or see a shadow dart in my rearview mirror, I remember that chilling night in 2007 when the lines between reality and the supernatural blurred, turning a regular cab ride into an encounter with the unknown. Story number 8. Static on the radio, the eerie broadcasts of Fletcherville. In 2008, when I was 26 and fresh to the world of cab driving, a peculiar event left me questioning reality. The quiet suburbs of Fletcherville, with its majestic oaks and Victorian homes, was the last place you'd expect dark secrets to emerge. It was a misty evening when Emma, a 25-year-old journalist, hailed my cab. As she settled in, my radio, usually tuned to a rock station, played nothing but static. Suddenly, amidst the static, a muffled voice whispered, "Beware of the bridge at Miller's Creek." Assuming it was interference, I shrugged it off. But as we approached Miller's Creek, the bridge ahead was ablaze, the flames dancing eerily in the dark. Firefighters were already on scene. Had the voice on the radio somehow predicted this? As we rerouted, the static returned. The diner on Elm. She waits. Now intrigued, Emma decided to join me on this unexpected adventure. We drove to Elm, and right outside the local diner stood a sobbing young woman named Claire, a 22-year-old teacher. She'd been waiting for a ride that never showed up. She claimed that earlier in the day, she'd narrowly escaped an attempted kidnapping. Eager to unravel the mystery behind these forewarnings, Emma began investigating. She discovered that decades ago, there existed a radio show called Fletcherville Secrets, hosted by an enigmatic man named Raymond. It was rumored that Raymond had ties to the occult and had been involved in multiple unexplained deaths before vanishing without a trace. The radio station was demolished, but some believed Raymond's spirit lingered, broadcasting from the beyond. As the night deepened, the static-filled warnings grew darker. The old theater on Westwood. It awakens. Following the ominous directive, we found the long-abandoned theater's doors open. Hesitantly, we entered and stumbled upon a group, dressed in robes, attempting to summon a dark entity. Upon seeing us, the leader, a man in his late 20s named Daniel, decided we should be part of their ritual. Cornered and terrified, we watched as they began an exorcism, trying to bind a frightening ghost from the town's past to the physical realm. The static from the cab's radio, which I'd kept on, grew louder, filling the theater. "Begone," it screamed, echoing through the hall. The spectral form of Raymond materialized, his eyes filled with rage. He faced the cultists, unleashing a force that sent them fleeing, screaming into the night. As the sun peeked over Fletcherville, Emma, Claire, and I stood outside the theater, shaken but alive. The radio returned to its usual programming, the eerie static of Raymond's broadcast silenced once again. We vowed to keep the night's events secret, but Fletcherville's haunted past still whispers among its residents. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through the empty streets, the static returns, reminding me of that fateful night in 2008 when the dead reached out with a warning. Story number 9. Route 13's Illusion, the hallucinatory highway of Harrisburg. 2009 was my prime year as a cab driver in the quaint suburbs of Harrisburg. Though the town had its secrets, nothing prepared me for the night I decided to take Route 13. It began innocently enough. I was trying to reach the other side of town quickly and decided to use Route 13, a seldom used shortcut. No sooner had I merged onto the road, a dense fog enveloped the car. Straining my eyes, I noticed a figure in the distance. As I got closer, it took the form of Lily, a local 28-year-old waitress. She waved me down, panic evident in her eyes. I took a wrong turn and my car broke down. "Can you give me a ride back to town?" she pleaded. Glad for the company in the eerie fog, I agreed. But the moment she entered, the cab's environment changed. The radio started to switch channels on its own, settling on an old song from the 60s that neither of us recognized. The fog outside seemed to thicken, and shadowy figures darted in and out of my peripheral vision. As we drove further, the cab's interiors began to morph. The seats changed from their usual leather to a velvety red, the dashboard turned wooden, and the scent of aged whiskey filled the air. Lily, now wearing a flapper dress, looked at me with confused eyes. "Who are you? And where am I?" Panicking, I tried to turn the cab around, but it moved on its own accord, propelling us deeper into the fog. Suddenly, we were surrounded by a bustling 1920s party. People danced around the car, their laughter hollow and eyes lifeless. A man, appearing to be in his late 20s, approached the cab. "Welcome to Route 13's eternal party. I am Jason, the cursed soul bound to this illusion." Desperate to escape, I remembered my grandmother's tales of Harrisburg's dark past. She spoke of an exorcism gone wrong, where a young man, Jason, was falsely accused of devil worship and was murdered on Route 13. His restless spirit ensnared unsuspecting travelers in a never-ending party as a form of revenge. Recalling a protective chant she taught me, I began reciting it, urging Lily to join in. The illusion started to crumble, the figures fading away, and the cab returning to its original state. When the fog lifted, Route 13 was behind us. Lily, back in her waitress uniform, and I, gasping for breath, found ourselves on the familiar streets of Harrisburg. As dawn broke, we shared our experience with the town's elder, Mr. Thompson. He revealed that several unsolved disappearances over the years were linked to Route 13. Though no official records of Jason's death exist, the legend lived on through whispers and stories. Route 13 became Harrisburg's forbidden path, and I made a silent vow never to traverse it again. That night in 2009, reality and illusion merged, reminding me that some roads are better left untraveled. Story number 10. The Never-Ending Fair, the Sinister Streets of Suttonville. 2010, Suttonville. I was enjoying the monotony of my job as a cab driver until that fateful night. As the sun dipped and the first shades of night crept in, I picked up a young gentleman, Derek, from the outskirts of town. He was a journalist, having moved to Suttonville for a piece on unsolved mysteries in suburban America. His destination was a popular bar downtown. However, as we traveled, I noticed something unsettling. The meter, which usually ticks in a rhythmic cadence of distance and fare, began to speed up exponentially. Yet, Suttonville's familiar landscapes seemed to repeat themselves. The same old bakery, the same neon sign of a laundrette, the same alley cat crossing the road. Over and over again. Panic welled up inside me. Do you see this, Derek? I asked, pointing at the surroundings. Derek, furrowing his brows, began to make notes. This is exactly the kind of thing I wanted to explore. Local legends say that those with unsettled scores are made to face their past in a loop until they resolve it. I racked my brain. Was there something I hadn't made peace with? As I reflected, my mind raced back to a year ago, when I had a heated argument with my childhood friend, Natalie, over a trivial matter. We hadn't spoken since. As the cab kept looping, Derek's calm demeanor turned to despair. The ticking of the meter began to sound like a deafening drumbeat, mocking our entrapment. But Derek had an idea. Talk to Natalie, he suggested. Maybe this loop is tied to your unresolved issues with her. With no better plan, I dialed Natalie. The phone rang, amplifying the tension in the air. When she finally answered, her voice was a balm to my fears. We discussed, apologized, and as our conversation concluded, the familiar landscape of Suttonville began to shift. The bar Derek wanted to visit came into view, and the cab meter returned to its regular pace. Relieved, we reached the bar. Derek paid his fare, his face a shade paler than when he had first entered the cab. "Looks like I got my story, and you got closure," he remarked. The next day, Derek's piece on the event was published, drawing attention to Suttonville's haunted streets and the importance of confronting the past. The story became an instant sensation, merging with the creepypasta tales that often circulated online. That night, I learned that some rides, much like life's challenges, can only end when we face our past. And as for Suttonville's streets, they continue to hold their secrets, making many question the lines between reality and the supernatural. Story number 11. Eyes in the Dark, The Watchers of Westbrook. 2011, Westbrook. I had heard stories about the outskirts of our town, but I had always brushed them off as urban legends. That was until one cold November evening. It was around midnight when I received a call for a pickup. 3 youngsters, Amy, a budding archaeologist, Brandon, a fresh journalism graduate, and Claire, a nurse in training, wanted a ride to the infamous Westbrook Woods for a dare. Tempted by the hefty fare they offered, I reluctantly agreed. As we made our way towards the woods, the air grew colder, and an unsettling fog rolled in. The car's headlights struggled to pierce through the thick blanket, but it was enough to illuminate the eyes. Dozens of them. Like fireflies, but bigger and more sinister. They weren't animal eyes, they had a human-like depth, tracking our every move, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Claire, her voice trembling, was the first to notice. Do you see them too?" Brandon, trying to be the brave one, laughed it off. "Probably just some animals." But Amy, with her inherent curiosity, wasn't so sure. "There's something more to this. Westbrook Woods have always been surrounded by mystery." Determined to uncover the truth, Amy and Brandon decided to step out, despite Claire's protests. I was hesitant, but the thought of leaving them alone felt worse. Armed with just a flashlight, we ventured towards the eyes. As we approached, the eyes seemed to float backward, always staying out of clear sight, leading us deeper into the woods. We stumbled upon an old, decrepit chapel, with symbols of devil worship scattered around, hinting at dark rituals. It was there that we found journals detailing ghastly ceremonies, where villagers were transformed into eternal watchers, their souls bound to the forest, doomed to look out with glowing eyes. Amy theorized, these rituals, these watchers, they might be the village's way of protecting the secrets of the woods. Brandon, realizing the gravity of our discovery, began documenting everything. But as he did, the temperature suddenly dropped, and a gust of wind blew out our flashlight. We felt surrounded. The whisper of a chant grew louder, and unseen hands grasped at us. In sheer panic, we sprinted back to the cab, with Claire's screams echoing our terror. The eyes seemed to chase us, but as we crossed the boundary of the woods, they halted, watching silently. We drove in silence, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. Brandon's article, coupled with Amy's research, sparked an investigation, revealing numerous exorcism deaths and unsolved mysteries tied to the Westbrook Woods. The story soon became fodder for online horror enthusiasts, weaving its way into the annals of creepypasta legends. Now, when I recount that night, people often say it's just a tall tale. But every time I pass by those woods and see those eyes staring back, I'm reminded of the haunting truth of Westbrook. And I drive a little faster, hoping to leave those eyes far behind. Story number 12. The Haunted Horn, Midnight Rides of Ravensbrook. 2012, Ravensbrook. It was in this quaint suburb that I bought my first cab, a vintage, restored beauty. I was so proud of my acquisition. But as with all things too good to be true, there was an eerie secret tied to that car, its horn. I discovered its oddity one fateful evening. I had picked up a trio from downtown: Mark, an ambitious lawyer; Lila, a passionate historian; and Jason, a skeptical detective. Traffic was heavy, and instinctively, I honked the horn. The moment it sounded, day turned to night instantly. The cab was silent for a few moments until Lila whispered, "Did anyone else see that?" Each honk after brought about a new bizarre phenomenon. A ghostly child would appear in the rearview mirror, laughing and pointing. A sudden thick fog would shroud the cab, making visibility near zero. My passengers, initially amused, soon turned frantic. Mark, trying to rationalize, said, "It's some sort of optical illusion, or perhaps a mechanical trick." But Jason, his detective instincts tingling, felt differently. "There's a pattern. Every time you honk, something paranormal happens." Lila, with her knowledge of local history, chimed in, "There's an old legend about a cursed horn in Ravensbrook. It was said to have belonged to a cab from the 1920s. The cab was involved in an accident with a child, and ever since, it's said that the horn carries a curse." Determined to break this curse and find answers, we drove to the town's library. Lila found an article about the accident, which mentioned an exorcism ritual to free trapped spirits. As the fog enveloped the cab again, Jason decided to take control. "We need to perform this exorcism." With Lila guiding us through the ritual, we sat in a circle around the horn. Candles lit, and chants whispered, we tried to free the spirit of the child. But, to our horror, more apparitions appeared, all victims of tragedies tied to the cursed horn. Mark, overwhelmed by guilt of past courtroom misdeeds, was the first to be consumed by the encroaching fog. Lila, in her final moments, discovered that her ancestors were involved in creating the horn, sealing her tragic fate. Jason and I managed to escape, but not without scars. He gave up his career, forever haunted by the events of that night. As for me, I abandoned the cab at the outskirts of Ravensbrook. Despite its cursed history becoming the stuff of modern creepypasta legends, no one has dared to reclaim it. Now, as I recall those events, I hear tales of an old, fog-covered cab parked on Ravensbrook's edge, its horn silent, but its past forever echoing in the whispers of the town. Story number 13. The Cursed Coin, Riddles of Redwood Ridge. 2013, Redwood Ridge. I was having an uneventful night, my cab humming down the streets. It was a Tuesday, usually a slow night, and I was contemplating calling it early when a young woman hailed me from the curb. Her name was Clara, a vibrant art student with a passion for ancient artifacts. She was animatedly talking about a recent estate sale find when her phone died. Reaching her destination, she rummaged her purse for cash, eventually handing me an old coin, unlike any I had seen before. "It's from the estate sale." "Pretty neat, huh?" she said, eyes gleaming. "Just keep it, consider it a tip." The moment the coin touched my hand, a cold shiver ran down my spine. That very night, strange occurrences began. I saw ghostly apparitions in my rearview mirror. My cab's lights would flicker, and the engine would occasionally stall for no reason. Soon, It wasn't just my cap. My apartment lights began to flicker too, and one night, a shadowy figure stood at the foot of my bed, pointing at the coin. Panicked, I called my friend Daniel, a journalist with a penchant for the supernatural. Relating my experiences, he grew increasingly alarmed. "I've heard of such artifacts," he said. "Cursed items that bring calamity unless returned to their rightful place." With the help of Clara, we retraced the coin's origins to an old mansion at the edge of Redwood Ridge. The estate had once belonged to a notorious devil worshipper, and the coin was part of a ritual to gain wealth at a terrible cost. Determined to end the curse, the three of us, along with Michael, an amateur exorcist, ventured into the mansion. The dilapidated house was a labyrinth of horrors. We encountered spirits of those who previously possessed the coin, each warning us of impending doom. In the heart of the mansion, we found an old altar. Placing the coin upon it, Michael began an exorcism rite. As he chanted, the room grew colder, and dark shadows converged on us. Clara and Daniel were overwhelmed, their screams echoing as they were consumed by the darkness. In the chaos, I grabbed the coin and threw it into the fireplace. A blinding light filled the room, banishing the shadows. Clara and Daniel were gone, and Michael lay motionless, a victim of the exorcism gone awry. I fled Redwood Ridge, haunted by the memories. The cursed coin and its history became part of Redwood's Creepypasta lore. To this day, I wonder about the price of my escape and the darkness that might still linger in that forsaken mansion.